Chamo para ministrar a segunda palestra do primeiro dia do Preserva-me 2018 a senhora Ana Adamek, historiadora e curadora da Ingenium, Museus de Ciência e Inovação do Canadá, instituição que reúne 3 importantes museus canadenses: Museu de Aviação e Espaço, Museu de Agricultura e Alimentação e o Museu de Ciência e Tecnologia. A palestra versará sobre os desafios e as estratégias utilizadas pela Ingenium na gestão da coleção de energia da instituição e sobre a parceria da Ingenium com comunidades indígenas do Canadá. I would like to invite Ms. Adamek to the stage, please.
So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me here. I really appreciate the organizers giving me this chance to share some information about what we do in Canada and also to learn from everything that you are doing here in Brazil. So thank you very much for having me here. There are 2 parts to this presentation. I will start by talking about rather traditional museum functions, the research that we do, collections that we build, how we build collections, what we do with the research. And then after lunch, my colleague Shane will follow with less traditional approach to museum work. So he will talk about how we take all this information and how we disseminate it across the country to really raise the level of literacy. So first, really quickly, who we are. We are a national museum. Ingenium is a brand name, but our official name is National Museum of Science and Technology Corporation. That is the name, the legal name. We operate 3 museums as the corporation: Science and Technology, the largest of the 3, Aviation and Space Museum, and Agriculture and Food Museum. As a curator, I am working for the corporation. I am not working for any of those specific museums, which means that it may be surprising, but you will find electricity in all 3 museums. So, for example, in aviation and space, we look at how energy is applied in aviation, and we had an exhibition on fuel efficiency, energy efficiency in aviation. And in agriculture and food, a few years ago we created a park that showed biofuels, different crops that we grow for biofuels. We serve around 14 million Canadians through our 3 museums and online. We have over 100,000 artifacts, and these are just entries. Many of these artifacts have many parts, so it is a large, very large collection. Museums themselves will reach over 1 million visitors this year, which for Canada, 36 million population, it's quite a bit. We also have a loan program which allows us to send our artifacts across the country to other museums or other institutions. And having the agriculture museum, we actually have live animals. So let's look at the National Energy Collection. The Energy Collection contains about 10,000 3-dimensional artifacts and about 5,000 pieces of either photographs, trade literature, advertisements, list of parts, catalogs through which appliances were sold, so 2-dimensional artifacts. The collection falls into 3 large areas. So energy electric is the main subject under which we collect artifacts, but we also look at industrial technologies. So we have another group of artifacts that speak to the use of electricity, especially for industrial operations. And then we look at domestic technologies. So our collection of domestic technologies was actually conceived, was first created to show the process of electrification of the country. So we collected home appliances, but not to show the housework, to show how the country was electrified and how the natural gas infrastructure was built. Now we are looking to extend that understanding of the collection because our households are much more about consumer technologies than about electrification. So we will complement the story of electrification with the story of consumerism, which also is linked to the consumption of energy. The focus of the collection is on electricity as the carrier of energy. We do some research, we do some collecting around hydrogen, for example, around fuels, but we mostly deal with the history of electricity. We look at all the sources of energy that are available in Canada, so that Canada's energy mix, and you have all the sources listed here. But we focus on the ones that have the largest portion of the Canada energy mix. So hydroelectricity, nuclear power, and fossil fuels, so oil and natural gas. But we also look, for example, at wind energy, which is really growing in Canada, ocean and tidal energy, an important area of research in Canada. There is much less of biofuel, geothermal, or solar energy. So these are not the research priorities at this moment. We look at generation, we look at transmission and distribution, which for some people outside of the subject area, it may be surprising. We have a very large collection of cables, cross-section of cables. But of course, that development is extremely important to the ability to carry energy on long distance. For example, the cable that you see right here was developed at Niagara in one of the earliest powerhouses to carry electricity over long distance. And then we also collect newer artifacts, such as this model of a potential transmission tower, to show how our aesthetics change. And we look at consumption. So we look at what we call the user side. In that user side, we look both at the, for example, repairs that need to be done at home, measuring of electricity. This is one of, this is a test set, electric test set, that was used by the first electrician in the city of Waterloo. We have artifacts such as this kettle, which was the very first kettle in the city of Timmins. It's interesting that this object in Waterloo comes from late 1890s, this one from 1930s. It was acquired by an owner of the local hardware store who would invite the entire town to see that water could be boiled using electricity. But it shows us the time span of that electrification process, which even in urban Canada takes a while, and then in rural Canada takes till 1950s, at least till 1950s. Objects such as this iron, yes, they talk to the history of electricity, but they also talk to the social history. So, for example, the iron itself was designed for upper-class women who, in the crisis of 1930s, could not afford their servants anymore. So they would have to do the housework. They didn't want to do the housework, and they would buy appliances that were a fashion statement, not just electric typical household appliances, but fashion statements. So we try to present that aspect of electrification of Canada. And then you see again here, this is that 2D collection. So that shows us different perspectives, different perceptions around the process of electrification, more of that cultural aspect of electrification. So it is quite an extensive interpretation of the process of electrification. As a national museum, we have to present energy and the process of electrification in the national context, so coast to coast to coast. And there are very different perceptions on energy in, for example, Quebec, which is very rich in hydroelectricity, and Alberta, that lives off oil, and especially oil sands. So we have to ensure that we present all these perspectives in a national museum. Just to give you an example of, oops, we'll go back. Sorry. Here. So to give you an example of how we may do this, a couple of years ago I looked at acquiring a collection of protest signs. So I looked across the country to see what protest was happening against sources of energy, and contacted these various groups to bring the protest signs into the collection. And I found that every single source of energy was being protested against. So, but in different provinces. So that gives us a bit of that understanding, behind the scenes understanding. Actually, the conversations themselves were quite informative. So getting a protest signs against fracking and shale gas was very easy. I would call the group and say, I'm from the National Museum, could you send me one of your signs? No problem. But when I contacted people who were protesting wind turbines, wind development, they did not want their signs in a national collection. So in a way that showed me that it was okay to protest in the community as a group, but they were still very apprehensive about others knowing that they don't want wind energy. So interesting perceptions. We also look at perceptions around consumption. So overconsumption is a big problem in Canada. So we try to collect evidence of that. The artifacts in the Ingenium date from about 12th century till the newest objects. The electrical collection focuses on 1800s, so maybe 1850s, the earliest that you see here, 1850s, to the newest objects that we acquired in 2017. This one here, this is a proof of concept magnetized target fusion device, so really new research that goes on in the country. So some highlights from the collection. I think we have the best energy collection in the world. Some other museums may not agree. These pieces come from Adam's powerhouse at Niagara, so what we would call in North America the first long-distance transmission of electricity from Niagara to Buffalo that proved we can power cities farther from the source of hydroelectricity. The generator here was designed, it was a winning design in the competition done by the companies at Niagara. It was designed by Tesla. It's the only complete existing first generation alternating current generator in the world. So designed by Tesla himself and then made by Westinghouse. So it's quite a treasure. It's very interesting to look at that object close and see, for example, or the graffiti, the names that people left on it as they work in those power houses. Another example, Ferranti transformer, serial number 22, so again the oldest existing Ferranti transformer in the world. It came from England, from Trafalgar Square power houses there. But actually the British Museum has a later model than this one, so we can do that comparison. We generally collect artifacts that have Canadian significance. When I present something to the acquisition committee, I have to justify technological and Canadian significance. But with pieces such as those pieces from Niagara or this transformer, because they have such a global importance, we do collect them in our museum. They transformed the world, they transformed Canada. We owe some of this collection to one of the largest utility generator and distributor of electricity, Ontario Hydro, so the distributor for the province of Ontario. Ontario Hydro tried to create a museum in early 1960s. They were not able to sustain it, but they donated the collection to us. So that really helped with this kind of treasures that we couldn't otherwise afford. Another example, generator made by Edison, who came to Canada to provide electricity for the very first Canadian company to be electrified, cotton company in Canada. And this interesting object, which calls itself Canada's first electric motor. So objects like this really make us question if artifacts lie. We know about the first Canadian motor. We know where it was used, in Toronto, in an ice cream store. We are able to trace its history to a certain point. And then we are able to trace the history of this object to a certain point, but they don't meet. So we are not able to confirm, and we are able to deny that this is the Canada's first electric motor. And another good example from 1894, from the very first canal in the world that was electrified, that was operated by electricity. And technology is one aspect of it, but it's the beauty and the aesthetic of the process of electrification that we want to depict by artifacts such as this one. Is the prestige behind operating your facility with electricity that was important. Wind energy is another area. It's a little known story in Canada and abroad that Canadians were important in the development of the vertical axis wind turbines. And I mentioned new technology. This is a nuclear fusion reactor which we have in the collection, which is probably the only nuclear fusion reactor on a public display in the world. And another piece of new technology, Tesla power. I'll talk about it a little later. So how do we collect? We actually have a very strict collection policy. We follow collection development strategy and our federal funding. So our federal funding depends on us following this collection development strategy. We get audited quite a bit. So first we produce historical assessments, which are histories of technology. So history of hydroelectricity, history of energy, wind energy, etc. And from those historical assessments, curators produce collection assessments. So we basically ask a question: what is the ideal collection on, let's say, hydroelectricity? What is the ideal collection on wind energy? And from that document, we start active collecting. So we identify the artifacts, and then we actively search for these artifacts across the country, and we acquire them for the collection. About 90% of our artifacts come through donation, about 10% we acquire. Our facilities, storage facilities, warehouses right now are in very poor shape. Literally, we have to protect artifacts if there is a rainfall. So we are very lucky to be able to build this new storage facility. You see the museum here? So you see how large the storage facility will be next to the Science and Technology Museum. We will move all the collections to this new facility by 2021, and we will also establish a research institute. We do have a research program, but now we will have a very formal place where we can invite scholars to come in, study our collections. We will have a special room where we can retrieve the artifacts and allow students to be really up close to the objects. So this is a project we are conducting right now. The move of the collection also allows us to go back to the artifacts we have, see what belongs and what does not belong in the national collection. So we have been collecting since 1967. National museums started a bit earlier than that, but our museum was established in 1967. We have lots of spare parts, for example, parts that don't really belong to an artifact. We have duplicates. So now we have an opportunity to go back to the collection and clean it up. And while we do that, we learn a lot about what we have. So what do we do with the collections? We were talking about how important the dissemination of the information is. We do lots of curatorial research, which we communicate through traditional papers and publications, but we also have a fellowship and internship program. Right now we have 4 fellows from across Canada who come to our facility to study material culture of energy. We do lots of workshops, so we invite students to come into our warehouses. We are probably one of the most open museums in that regard. We will take people into the warehouse, we will retrieve artifacts, we train people how to handle artifacts, and then we train students on, we call it reading artifacts, so how do you read information from objects. We use lots of that material culture methodology. We publish a transformation series, so the theme behind everything we do is how did this technology transform Canadian society? That's always a question that we ask. So how did the electrification process transform Canadian society? So we published around 20 volumes right up to this point. But about 3 years ago, we also adopted open heritage approach. So we call it radical transparency, which means that everything we produce goes online, is accessible to the public within 2 hours of us saving a document. So if I write a paper, or if I prepare this presentation, it's accessible to the general public through that open heritage as I produce it. It took us out of our comfort zone, I can tell you that. We are used to publish perfect papers, or as perfect as it can get. But now everybody sees every mistake you make. But it really opens up our research. All the documents, all the research documents, all documents that relate to exhibitions, everything goes online within 2 hours. Of course, personal information, human resources, payments, that is still confidential, but research documents are made available. And we do exhibits. We were very lucky to have a large exhibition just devoted to energy. It was on the floor for about 3 years, and it really went deep into what energy means to our country, how we consume, all the sources, transmission of energy. We had some of those treasures on the floor. We are very oriented to our families with children and multi-generational audiences, so we had this type of messaging. But then in 2014, the museum quite literally fell apart. It wasn't as dramatic as the fire in your museums, but we had 5 minutes to evacuate the staff and the visitors. We found that we had toxic mold in walls, asbestos in the air, and the roof was about to collapse. So within 5 minutes, everybody was out of the museum. We took about 3 months to remove the artifacts. They all had to be fumigated, they had to be cleaned, we had to wear hazmat suits when we were going into the place. So it was quite dramatic. But it allowed us to rebuild the museum. And this is the new building that you see. So in 3 years, we rebuilt the museum and we made all the new exhibitions, 6 new galleries, and several different exhibitions. So right now, we don't have an exhibit that is devoted just to energy. We decided that energy will be treated as part of natural resources. So we have this exhibition called From Earth to Us, which looks at the transformation of natural resources into all the things, material things that we need in our, and want in our lives, but also energy that we need to produce and run them. So we orient the visitor to make them understand where that energy fits into the natural resources sector. So we start with chemical elements that build all the resources we have, then how we transform these resources into energy sources, energy carriers that we use, and finally end products. So just a view of the exhibition as it looks right now. You see here that nuclear fusion reactor on display. When we did this exhibition for the energy section, we knew we had too many good stories, good energy stories. So we identified 11 different stories, and we sent out those stories to a panel of 900 people who we kind of can use as advisors, but also as kind of test group for what we want to do. So we sent the 11 stories, and visitors chose 3 that they found the most interesting. So one of those stories was nuclear fusion. That was a surprise to us. We thought that maybe people will be more interested in fission, which is a very important area in Canada, but no, they wanted to know more about nuclear fusion. Hydroelectricity. So we have a section that tells the story of Niagara and some interactives around hydroelectricity, and then oil, which is not surprising. So we do talk about different types of oil extraction, oil sands, challenges associated with those forms of those sources of energy. We started this exhibition with an everyday product. So at each entrance to the exhibition, and we have 3 entrances, a visitor encounters what we call an exploded product. So it could be a toaster, toys, lots of natural resources go into making toys, and smart car. So for example, smart car, toaster, we took them apart to show all the materials we need to produce them, all the resources we need to produce these materials, all the chemical elements that go into them, but also all the energy needs that we have for those appliances. So this makes energy as a topic closer to a visitor. We look at historical artifacts too, so in this case we focus on heating, lighting, cooling, heating especially extremely important in Canada. But we also have artifacts such as, it's hard to see here, we have 2 light bulbs on display here, one made by Edison, very first generation of his light bulbs. And then next one is made by Swan in Great Britain, and this allows us to talk about who invented the light bulb, how did this happen. So it may look like a static case, but we can have lots of conversation about those artifacts. Another goal that we have, so I said we always start with personal. We also try to link the past to present to future. So we do it in our research, but also in exhibitions. It's not an easy thing to do, especially for a historian of technology, to actually deal with present technologies, or we always say historians are not in a business of predicting future, but we are trying to link this to the trends, larger societal trends in Canada. So here you see historical artifacts used to store energy. So for example, there is a clock with a spring. You would save energy in a spring. There are different types of batteries developed over time, voltaic pile, flywheel on an engine. But on the other side, so here you have the historical artifacts, and then here there is Tesla Powerwall. So this is one of maybe 5 Powerwall batteries in entire Canada. It was quite fun to try to contact Tesla and get this battery, but that's another story. But this shows us the importance of storage and importance of developing storage that actually allows us to disconnect from the grid and maybe have more energy choices. So again, lots of discussions that can happen around this artifact. There is of course the part of promotion. I mean, the Powerwall, does it really work? It's not really on the market yet after years in development, but there was certainly lots of promotion that Tesla put into that technology. We are very interactive. We are a hybrid between a national museum, I mean we are a national museum, but hybrid between a museum and the science center. So I have for you one interactive that we developed for hydro to show the impact and the benefits from hydro. I hope the video works. Yes. So you can see the farmland, you can see the city that does not have lights. And then visitors have to install a dam, and they see the community being relocated and some flooding of the land. We were developing this interactive with Canadian Hydropower Association and with facilities, different facilities, to make sure that it's very correct. Then there is the power station, so much less of that impact. And finally, the visitors install a transmission line. So again, they saw that the trees had to be removed, and the power is brought to the city, so the benefit of having the power in the city is there. Yes. What we did want to do on that particular interactive, just with the translation, they asked me to wait a bit.
Nós estamos só com um probleminha na interpretação simultânea. Ela vai aguardar por um minutinho até consertar ali, ok? That was resolved. So I was talking about that interactive and the fact that we wanted to have more scenarios than just that one. For example, we wanted to develop a scenario with Canadian indigenous population. Canada's indigenous people have very different view of hydro, construction of hydro than English or French Canadians would have. But that's one of the challenges, that within our timelines we were just not able to do that. We only had 3 years to rebuild the entire museum, so it's not perfect, but still it's a good start. Here you see another approach to our artifacts. We have a very large collection of light bulbs, and there is no way that we can document or exhibit these light bulbs separately with interpretation. So we decided to give them to an artist, and she created an interactive light bulb installation which visitors can control, so they can choose a sequence of lights that go through the artifacts. We are of course not using the actual light bulbs, we have LEDs installed throughout those light bulbs, but these are historical artifacts dating to 1880 that at least now we have on the floor. And that mix of science center and the museum, actual artifact nuclear fusion reactor, but it is incorporated into an interactive that teaches children the principles of fusion. They need to achieve 4 states of fusion, and then the artifact lights up. So the gallery is the main place of interpretation of electricity, but we do have artifacts that deal with electricity throughout the museum in other galleries. Here you see a beautiful lamp. We have 2 of these lamps in the collection, so we did rewire this one and visitors can turn it on.
So let's talk about some of the challenges around this collection. One of the challenges that I already brought up is the new technologies, past to present to future. We really want to bring the collection up to date. We do collect new technologies. Our historical assessments don't really give us much information about these new technologies. So we need to learn quickly on our own. We try to create advisory committees that would advise us on what is not just important now, but what will be important in the long term. We don't want to end up with a collection that has lots of new technologies that 50 years from now don't mean anything, were not important. There are also practical challenges. So for example, the turbine here. This is an ocean energy turbine. Canada was the third country in the world to have tidal energy stations, so ocean energy is quite an important development. So we did want to have this turbine in the collection. It was produced in 2002. But I had to work on that company's timeline. I had to wait for them to be finished with all the experimentation that they were doing. They were testing, for example, the paint on the turbine, the design of the turbine in relation to sea life. They wanted to create a habitat. So of course that took much longer than the timeline that they gave me for the acquisition. But I have to mitigate that with my acquisition committee at the museum. Even transporting this turbine to the museum was quite a challenge. It had to cross almost entire Canada from the west coast to Ottawa. And we had to have the Royal Canadian Mounted Police escort the turbine. It was on an oversized truck that almost took houses along the way as it was coming to us. But we did manage, and it's an important object to preserve. Solar cells, perovskite solar cells, a really new technology. We couldn't actually acquire this technology yet. The company only agreed to loan it to us. So we have it on loan, but hopefully within that period of the loan, they will have other examples and they will donate this to us. We had to sign a very strict non-disclosure agreement. There are about 3 sentences that I can say right now about this technology, and it's a penalty of $1 million if we release more information. They were very careful around the proprietary nature of this new technology. Only 3 people in the museum can handle it. But we agreed to all these conditions because now we can preserve this and all the information around it for future researchers. So it's not about making the information available now, it's about having it for those who will study it 10, 50 years from now. Another challenge is the change in curatorship, which I'm sure those of you who work in museums know very well. We are required now to share authority. A curator is not really the last authority over a subject area. So how do we do that? How do we share the authority over acquisitions of artifacts with the general public? We use crowdsourcing, and we had quite a successful campaign, crowdsourcing campaign, which we did about 5 years ago around kitchen appliances. So we asked Canadians across the country these 2 questions. What is your favorite kitchen appliance? What this appliance say about your life today? We engaged the media. We had lots of responses from the public. This type of anecdotes about pouring coffee maker, which at the time was a rage in the country, really a fashion statement. So this allowed us to identify 8 appliances which Canadians either wanted to have or already had in their kitchens. We bought 8 to adapt to $1,000 to have the economic information in that collection. We also acquired photographs of kitchens from across the country that showed these appliances. People were sending us photos of their kitchens. We created a website called Memories Are Made in the Kitchen, where they could contribute the photos and stories. We have photographs of these appliances being on shelves in stores, all the advertising, literature around. So it's a great research collection for future historians, and really done as that shared authority with the public. We also share the authority over exhibits with our visitors. That is something very important to us. We do lots of testing. So here you have an example of visitors telling us which artifacts they wanted to see on the floor. This doesn't mean that we would not exhibit this one, the painting. It just means that we have to work extra hard to make it engaging for visitors. And then we do lots of tracking through the museum, which shows us that this is from Earth to Us gallery. So you see all these red spots are where groups of visitors were stopping for longer period of time. But then you see where they are not stopping. So I know that this is an area I need to improve. And finally, indigenous relations, and you can see how empty this slide is. Canada only very recently went through the reconciliation process. We have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission report that came up a couple of years ago. So that report guides how we work with indigenous communities. It is really a nation-to-nation relationship. It's a relationship that we only start to build now. There is lots of mistrust toward federal institutions such as our in First Nation communities. But we are determined to do it and do it the right way right now. I will give you one example of those challenges. We are preparing a conference on indigenous astronomy. That conference cannot happen in the museum in a room like this one. It's going to happen outside in a field. So we will have to provide generators, we have to have a portable observatory, but this is what those the indigenous communities do. This is how they observe. They don't talk in a room about the subject. So there will be a sweat lodge. Very, very different approach for us. So we do have to change our culture, our institutional culture. And that's basically my presentation for today, and I will be happy to answer your questions. Thank you. So for the questions in Portuguese, I will use the set. So if you ask in Portuguese, just give me a second.
Perguntas novamente, por favor. Lembrando que pedimos que digam o seu nome e a instituição a qual pertencem. Só levantar a mão que o microfone chega até os senhores. Alguma pergunta, por favor? Sim, aqui na frente, Bea, por favor.
Meu nome é Rafael, eu sou arquivista da Memória da Eletricidade. Me identifiquei muito com uma fala sua, quando você falou das novas tecnologias e da dificuldade de acesso a esse acervo para preservação. A gente também, há um ano atrás, a gente correu atrás de documentação sobre energia eólica e teve muita dificuldade do acesso por conta de ser ainda algo em desenvolvimento e estratégico para as empresas. Apesar de nós já vislumbrarmos que tudo que está sendo produzido vai se já nasce como histórico, né? E uma pergunta que eu queria fazer: no Centro da Memória nós temos como estratégia para a preservação da memória do setor elétrico a custódia de acervos pessoais em papel. A gente tem coleções de vários personalidades do setor elétrico, de algumas empresas, e aqui no Brasil é prática de muitos museus também terem acervo em papel. Vocês lá têm também acervo em papel?
Yes, it's interesting. First of all, you mentioned that challenge. I work a lot with advisory committees because if I call a company, they will not answer. They are in business of making money, not in business of heritage preservation. So I use advisory groups that are closely connected to different companies to gain the access, to gain the trust. But it takes years. Sometimes it takes me 5-6 years to acquire an artifact. And throughout that period, I'm joking, I have to make sure that they like me. If they don't like me, they will not give anything to the museum. But in terms of documentation, yes, we have an archive. So we try to we have limited space, so we try to identify important Canadian companies and maybe collect documents from one company for a sector. There is also the National Archive. So we work closely with the National Archive to make sure that if we collect something, they don't. If they collect something, then everything goes to that depository. But we know, let's say if I was looking at energy, maybe I could collect something from a wind company, something from a hydro company, and that would fill up the room. So it is a challenge. There are also politics that come into donating of those documents. So companies may want to retain information that is proprietary, financial documents, which are important to researchers in the future. This is why we do agree to seal information. So we will take it, but nobody has access to it for now. So I hope that answers your question.
Próxima pergunta, por favor. Só um momentinho. Aqui,
Olá, Daniela Neves, da Eletrobras. Eu atuo no patrocínio e na parte de reputação. Sou Daniela Neves, da Eletrobras, atuo na área de patrocínio e reputação da empresa. E eu gostaria de perguntar, considerando, né, a influência da Agenda 2030 da ONU, conceitos novos estão surgindo, como economia circular, sustentabilidade aplicada ao modelo de negócios. E eu gostaria de saber se lá vocês já têm acompanhado essas mudanças dentro do setor de energia, dentro das aplicações práticas de energia.
So actually these changes make my job much easier. Canadian companies are very focused on corporate social responsibility. This is the keyword: sustainability, corporate social responsibility, and relations with indigenous communities. So not only our goals in the museum and goals of these companies align right now, but they do want to work with the museum to attain this, the goal of the corporate social responsibility. So we are a platform for many companies. When I say we are a platform for companies, that doesn't mean we will directly tell your story at the museum. But we will sit down with you, we will see where our goals align and what we can do together. The museum, though, always retains the final decision over what we present. So we work with companies, but we don't want to be under pressure from the companies. It really is about partnership. And when I talk about the shared authority, we do share that authority with companies too. So when I tell the story, I give the voice, I may give the voice to a generation company, but also to a chief of the First Nation in that area, also to the union from that company, union representative. So yes, our companies are going in that direction, and the museum is going in that direction.
Próxima pergunta. A professora havia levantado a mão.
Eu já falei que eu sou professora aposentada da UFRJ e da UERJ, e eu gostaria de saber se já houve lá no Canadá uma experiência dramática de uma construção de uma hidrelétrica prejudicar uma tribo indígena.
Yes, absolutely. There are at least two cases that are widely discussed. One is in the area of James Bay, and that's a Hydro-Quebec facility that was built there over a long period of time, starting in early 1970s. The indigenous community strongly oppose that development. There is so much politics behind that story that I can't possibly cover it all here. It's located very far from the city, so it's located far from voters, from people who would vote. It's out of sight, out of mind. So the indigenous communities, to be heard, had to travel to Ottawa, travel to Montreal. They actually organized a trip, canoe trip to New York, because the power was being sold to the United States. So we have photographs of representatives from this First Nation protesting on boats, on canoes, in front of the Statue of Liberty. So that is one of the stories. It is a story that we were telling in our museum, and the reaction from the company, from Hydro-Quebec, was quite strong. We had to do lots of public relations and lots of conversations with the company and with the First Nations around that story. Another story is Nelson River development, which crosses two provinces, British Columbia and Manitoba. So it's actually, in this case, the dams are built in British Columbia, and the impact is quite far down the river onto communities in Manitoba, Alberta, so in central Canada. So I am right now having conversations with these communities, with chiefs of these communities, to find out more. For us, I cannot just go to a First Nation community to ask my questions. I have to be invited by the chief to be able to go to the community and record that story. So that process is, like I said, it's not an easy process. But yes, we are trying to tell these stories.
Professor Knaus, gostaria de fazer a pergunta, por favor?
Obrigado. Queria parabenizar a apresentação e valorizar, não é, a construção desse museu que parece extraordinário. E eu fiquei muito entusiasmado pelo trabalho de coleção que vocês desenvolvem. Me chamou a atenção especialmente a ideia da autoridade compartilhada e da busca da relação com o público no processo de construção da coleção. E eu queria saber um pouco mais como isso se organiza. A senhora falou das memórias a partir da cozinha. Quem propõe esse tema? É a comissão de aquisição? É a comissão de curadores? E como isso é trabalhado com o público? Algum tipo de dinâmica com o público? Ou se faz pela internet? Eu queria mais informação sobre esse processo de autoridade compartilhada na construção da coleção, que me parece que é um tipo de ação original e que todos nós estamos buscando nos museus.
Yes, it is an interesting process. I would say that this is the culture of the institution. So the initiative may not come only from a curator. In this case, it did come. It was my initiative. I'm the only curator responsible for this subject area. But generally, all of us try to change into inviting participation from the public and from other experts. It's because we have so many subject areas now. So I am responsible for energy, but also mining, metallurgy, domestic technologies, and industrial design. There is no way that one person can have that knowledge. So we are very much open to having input. In this particular case, with the memories are made in the kitchen, so the curator, and I was working with an assistant at the time, I partnered with our public affairs for the museum, And so I brought the knowledge of the how do we collect and that historical background. They brought the knowledge of how to approach the public. So they were the ones who would organize media interviews, for example, for me. And it was striking how interested the media was. So the Canada National Broadcasting Corporation invited me to a program, and we were chatting about what we do, and people were tweeting at the radio station at the same time with those ideas. So that's how we were able to get lots of answers. It was lots of work. I often say there is no crowd in crowdsourcing. You have to create that crowd. But as working with the public affairs group, with people who were skilled in promotion, engagement, that helped a lot.
Próxima pergunta, senhor Augusto, por favor.
A minha questão estava indo também na linha da pergunta do Paulo, né? Gostei muito dessa ideia da divisão de autoridade, né? Porque no Brasil nós estamos refletindo muito também sobre a questão da curadoria. O Marcelo Cordera publicou um livro ano passado sobre isso, né? Quer dizer, na verdade, com esse acesso a esse acúmulo monstruoso de informação, o curador aparece como uma pessoa que fala: olha, você assiste tal filme, você vai em tal restaurante, você vê tal obra de arte, assim por diante. E quando você disse que você fez uma pesquisa para ver onde os observadores do museu, os visitantes do museu estavam parando ou não, eu achei fantástico isso. E aí, na linha do Paulo também, esse compartilhamento da curadoria, né? Quer dizer, como é que você vê isso? Hoje estamos muito preocupados com esse tema. A gente, por exemplo, pega um curador para fazer, por exemplo, uma exposição de artes plásticas, não é? E vai muito menos pessoas para ver aquela curadoria ou aquela exposição do que a gente pensava, né? Nós estamos por exemplo, em São Paulo, com a Bienal lá, e é impressionante como alguns dos apresentadores, dos artistas, tem muito pouca gente, outros estão muito... Quer dizer, o tema do curador e da curadoria está sendo colocado em questão. Como dividimos a autoridade dele para montar um espaço, né?
So as a curator, I don't want to do exhibits that nobody attends. And I don't want to do exhibits that nobody talks about. So the audience is key in all the plans that we do. We do have a process to address this. So, for example, when we start to plan new exhibitions, we usually come up with more than one topic. So our next exhibition, large exhibition, will be on failure of technology. Why do technologies fail, etc. We had about 7 different topics. So one was biomimicry, one was science and art, for the next large exhibit. And again, we sent those topics out to that panel of 900 people. And when we got the answers, it was very clear that people want to hear about failure. So I'd love to do all of these exhibits, but I will choose the one that people want to see. So we will do the exhibition on failure. And then we actually employ evaluation officer. She is the one who usually tracks visitors, talks to visitors, gives us the data. But she also invites curators to do that with her. So it's an eye-opener for a curator to be on the floor of the museum. She gives us a sheet of paper, and we have to mark what visitors do. So I have to say, visitors stop and talk to a child, visitors laugh. And then when we get, 100 of those pages, you start to see how your exhibition is consumed. So I know this is a change and not all the curators are embracing it, but we find it greatly improve our offerings to the public, our products to the public, while still they are based in research and in sound scholarship.
Senhoras e senhores, devido ao adiantado da hora, não teremos mais tempo para perguntas. Então, agradecemos mais uma vez a palestra da senhora Adamek. Muito obrigado.